in 12 monthly payments of $55. Now, a lot of my students have found that they're in.
Hello, Rachel.
Good evening, all.
Good evening, all.
I was rushing then because I was just having a big bowl of ice cream.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Evening, all.
Good evening.
What flavour ice cream? What brand?
Vanilla. Vanilla, just ordinary vanilla. I don't go for brands.
Are you fussy about ice cream, Kirk?
I'm not, but I know a lot of people
Hi,
are.
everybody.
I must admit, I do like the Cornish ice cream. It's very
Moorish.
Very partial to rum and raisin ice cream as well.
Well, we've got an ice cream farm not far from us.
We'll send some over. Don't keep it all for
So
yourself.
do they grow it?
They've got the what they call the what's the ice cream farm cows called, Jill? Oh, Jersey, that's the one.
Jerseys, they make really creamy milk.
So they've got the cows in the field, and then they've got the shed. Well, the cafe.
Excellent.
Hello, Diane.
Good evening.
Diane, have you come across John Donahue?
I haven't. The name doesn't ring a bell anyway. What does he do?
He's head of the Irish Bees Association, but there's a great talk on managing bees on YouTube.
Oh, right. I will write that down and look at it up.
Which he gave at the Honey Show last year, 2019. John Donahue. And one of the Irish. Sorry?
Worth watching.
Really good. I mean, one of his best bits of advice is he's a bit like he likes writing things down. You know, so he said writing things down is very important. And then halfway through the thing, he said, whenever somebody says to me, "What's the best book I can buy on bees?" he says, "The one you wrote last year."
Very good answer.
I like writing things down. I just wrote down John Donahue. So managing bees.
And then he says, you can look up the 100 mistakes you make last year so you don't make them this year.
Yeah. I mean, do you think I go on about records too much?
No. But I'm the worst at keeping records. I never keep records. And I can never remember what I'm looking at. You know, I think I can remember it, and I get there and I'm like, it doesn't look the same, but I can't remember what they were. I've never got in the habit of doing it.
I read about
you're not alone.
A fabulous idea of you have a brick and you keep it on top of your hive, and which way round it is means something. And it's like, no, I'd never remember that. I'd need it writing down. And if I'm going to write it down what the brick means, I may as well just write down notes from the hive, mightn't I?
Some Canadian guy does that, doesn't he? On one of his videos, he puts tape on the top of the thing, and he always puts a brick up one end. That means it needs to do something, re-queen or whatever it is.
Oh, yeah, one means it's got a queen, and it's
There's one that keeps a sheet of paper on the top of his roof, on the inside of the roof, and he writes it on there. So when you turn the roof up, it's there.
Yeah, but then I put super on that round board, so I wouldn't have seen it.
The bees ate my notes. Honestly, they did.
Oh yes.
I tried it because everyone there's all these things where people say, "Oh, you just leave a piece of paper in the top of your hive." No, you don't, because it ends up with little spots of stuff all over. There's bits chewed off it, and you just think it's a bit too damp to write on, because obviously there's moisture in the hive. So the next week you can't write on it.
I cheat, Diane. I use one of these, and then I lay it in front of my computer in Microsoft Word, put the computer on dictate, and it writes it all down on paper.
Yeah, I do that sometimes. I've definitely done that for a whole season, but coming to transcribe it, I just find quite tedious.
I think he's saying the computer transcribes it for you.
Yeah. That's what I need to do, I think.
Handy.
But then I don't know what it'll do when it's listening to the blackbird. When I've stopped and stood and listened to this blackbird for 5 minutes.
When it translates it, you've got to start worrying.
You
He gets
know a lot of
most of it correct.
you know a lot of your videos, Diane. Are they not? Whereabouts are they on YouTube? I know you sent me one.
There's two playlists at the moment. There's very few public. There's
one about your allotments and all that. And selfie stick.
Oh,
are
you looking on the right YouTube channel? Because I've got more than one.
I don't know. Why?
You should be on the beekeepers.
Yeah, I see that, but whenever I click on beekeepers, nothing else comes up.
No, because they're on playlists, so they're hidden. So you've got to have the playlist. Let me swap into the right account because I'm in a completely different account there. Let me see your videos.
Yeah, Dine Drink Water. There you go. Look,
No,
it
don't
comes
look
up.
for Dine Drink Water. That won't be the right one.
It's you though.
Oh, it is me.
It's about your allotment, your selfie stick.
Yes. I got a selfie stick and spent 20 minutes twirling around the allotment, making myself feel sick. About, I don't know, 6 years ago or something. If you look for the beekeepers, I've actually linked to it on my.
Thank you.
webpage.
The beekeepers. Yeah, I've got that there. Yeah.
The beekeepers. But there's two playlists. There's one called 2021 Absolute Essentials, which has 6 videos in it now, although they might not all be unique because I might have accidentally uploaded the same one twice. And then there's 14 in the other playlist, which I will stick in the chat now. Where's the chat? There. That's the playlist for the sort of last year's lot.
Right. So how do I get that on my phone then? How do I?
Oh, I've no idea. Let me find the chat again. Good evening, Chris. You're right, right in the middle of the screen today.
Just click the link. I can see it on my phone.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But yeah, they'll keep you busy for an hour. I think one from the other night was about 2 hours. And I cut the beginning off and the end off. And if you watch it, it really made me laugh how I'd cut it because I hadn't done it deliberately like that. I'd just cut all the banter off the beginning. And it says, are you sitting comfortably? And Tina says, yes, I am. And it just really, really made me laugh. There we go. That's them just coming in. So how is everyone this very damp Wednesday?
Anne, have you sent out the slides from Marin's talk that you promised?
I have sent it you definitely because so if you haven't got it, there's a chance you've actually had it twice and it's in your spam folder.
Okay, I'll have a look.
If you stay on at the end, I can prove I've sent it by looking. But I'd gone through after the day after and sent it to everyone who, well, 2 days after when he sent it me, I sent it through to everyone. And then you asked again or said, when's it coming out? And then 3 more people went, I'd really like the slides for that talk. And it's like, okay, if you'd have all asked at the same time, it would have been easier.
Oh, sorry about that, but it's not in my spam box.
Right, remind me at the end.
I'll speak to you later, yeah.
I don't know what it is because I haven't been coming, but please can I have it too?
I will say yes. It's Marin's slides from his talk. It was a BBKA talk he did the other day. It was very good. It's obviously not the same as actually listening to everything he was saying at the time, but he's got some interesting graphics in it. So, right, let me find that.
What's tonight's talk?
It is moving to a new home. as soon as I've finished undoing the terrible thing I've just clicked on. Just got to find my setup there. So someone's got a noisy background, so if you stay muted or turn your telly off if you want to speak, because it's a bit so let me get that ready. Right, are we all sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Moving to a new home, the transportation of bees and setting up new apiaries. I've been asked to do this one, so I think someone might be planning to move his hives and setting up a new apiary. So moving bees is always easier without supers on, because they're really, really, really heavy, especially when they're full, and it's a bit of a nuisance to be moving something really heavy, because you could quite easily hurt your back or fall over and get really badly stung for your trouble. The timing's important, and you have to consider the distance that you're going to be going. And there's a general rule that colonies can be moved under 3 foot or over 3 miles. And we'll explain a little bit about this. If you consider this black dot is your hive position, and the radius of this circle is about 3 miles, then this is the distance your bees can cover when they go out flying. And so if you move them less than 3 miles away, then when they go flying again, they're going to go onto land. They know, they'll recognise trees. And bees are a little bit clever and a little bit stupid at the same time, because they'll recognise the trees or a church or a big building or something in here, or maybe even a river, and they'll follow the directions back to their old house. So this is the risk. There is a zone here where the bees will fly into from their new position, get very confused, and you'll end up with a pile of cold, hungry, dead bees at this old position. So that's why we like to move them more than 3 miles away. And the 3 foot thing is because bees orientate to about 3 where their hive is. And if you move it more than 3 foot, they're going to remember where the old spot is, and they'll fly around in a circle that'll get bigger and bigger and bigger. And if they make it to the hive again, they'll be fine. But if you've moved it 5 foot, they might spend 3 hours swirling around. And on a nice summer's day, that's not really a problem. But in winter, they're going to die of cold and exhaustion before that actually happens. And if you move bees in your garden a distance more than 3 foot, and your neighbours can see into your garden, they are going to see this almighty swirling mass of bees, just bees that are just a little bit lost. They're not angry, they're not cross, but they look really like they're up to something, and it'll get your neighbours quite agitated. So that's the rule to stick to, under 3 foot or over 3 miles. And I'd suggest you actually measure it if you're moving them in your garden. Get a tape measure out and see actually how far it is, because it can be quite interesting what people's idea of 3 foot is. Yes, David.
So I just want to say there is a Google site you can go on to that you can measure 3 miles from your house.
I've got some grabs from it in a bit.
Yeah, that's okay.
So, oh, someone's coming in. Because bees learn where they live, they come out of their hive when they're about 5 days old, and they fly out a very short distance. They turn round and look at their hive. And these are the orientation flights that you get quite excited about when you see them, because you know it's a new batch of bees that are coming out and learning where they live. But they come out and they turn round and then they swirl round looking at the hive, fixing that as a location in their mind. And then they'll go a little bit further away and they'll look for other identifiers like other hives, big trees, fences, canals, lakes, even buildings. They will fixate on where they live using landmarks. So they are really clever and they're really good at learning it, which is why they'll get to this bit and they can't unlearn it very easily. So this homing in is the really important thing to notice. And if you've ever moved a hive and you've moved it too far, you'll know this swirling round thing. I'm quite tempted to try it in the summer and then get a video to insert there, because it can look really disturbing, this swirling round they do. And the orientation flights are the ones where they come out and learn, and you'll recognise that, and people quite often get really excited and get confused as to whether that means their bees are swarming. And it's important to look closely at the bees and see whether they're all flying out and away, or whether they're just circling round in little dances. So it's once you've recognised it as what it is, you'll know it's not swarming. Although when they come out to swarm, they will dance around quite a lot, but they move away fairly quickly. So 3 foot or 3 miles, I'm going to keep going on about that.
Can I just tell you my experience? I had my hives in the garden and it just got too much. And I had the opportunity to move them to a field about 1 kilometre away.
Yeah.
Not ideal, I know all that, but it was the better option. And I did that. And then for the next 3 nights, about a dozen or so bees would come back in the evening. So I'd take them back down to their proper home.
Yeah.
And that went on just for about 3 nights, until leaving a nute box for them to go to, so I could gather them. And then I took that box away, and then there was like 2 or 3 dead bees in the morning there for the next day, and that was it. So they either got completely lost or, you know, learned the new route.
We will look at one of the reasons, Mike, why there might not have been lots of bees, because there are exceptions. One of them is when you're putting a swarm in a hive. If you decide to move it within a day of putting it in a box somewhere, then you can generally get away with that, because they're more keen on staying with the queen, because of this really probably quite traumatic situation of having been sat in a tree for half a day before you came and collected them and put them in a nice safe dark box again. But you can be fairly flexible moving swarms, and if you collected a swarm from your neighbour's garden, you can quite easily bring it to your garden. There's no problem with that. You can take it 1 mile, 2 miles, a matter of feet if you want. There's no need to keep them where you collected them, otherwise there'd be some quite odd places you'd end up keeping bees, I think. The other thing to think about is if you live in a valley and this valley is too steep for the bees to fly over the top, then your bees have a different sort of range. So you could move them less than 3 miles to the other side of the hill, and they would never have been over there because the hill's too steep for them to go over, but they'll have been up and down the hill, and they might have actually been up and down the valley much further than if they were on relatively flat land. So if you needed to move them, say, to the other side of this hill, and it was only 1 mile away from where your hive was, the chances are that they're not going to have actually ever been there. So there will be no landmarks in common for them to find the way back to. And that's just repeating that if you want to move them away from the valley, then down the valley you might need to go 4 miles, because that they might just spend all day whizzing up and down, and they might find it's a really safe place to forage, so they'll go a bit further. This 3 miles thing, there is another figure of 5 miles, but I suspect bees that regularly forage 5 miles away die before they get home, and you're not going to find bees that regularly do that sort of distance. But that's one of the exceptions. There are probably others. If you've got maybe a very wide motorway, I don't know what the air currents are like over those. I've often wondered whether bees can traverse great big roads like that, or whether they actually use them as a guide, and so they'd go along and cross at various points with where there are other landmarks.
What about over water?
I don't think they like flying over water a long distance. So, and that's one of the reasons these isolation mating stations work in northern Germany, I think, because they are quite isolated. It might be Denmark actually, the top side of Germany there. That they're so isolated, bees from the mainland don't fly over. But you would be moving bees to a specific location, probably for a specific purpose, to somewhere very isolated.
So what kind of distance would you have to move them over water in order for them not to go back to their original position?
I don't know.
A mile?
I'm not sure
2 miles?
quite what you. If you've got an island in the middle of a lake that's 3 miles from shore,
Yeah.
then they're never going to have visited that island, I don't think.
What if it's a mile?
I suspect it's still quite unlikely they've been that way because there's no landmarks in between.
Right, so it's
and they
the
do
landmark
tend to
thing.
go landmarks.
Yeah. Okay.
So what about the sun?
The sun.
Yeah, the obviously the direction of the sun and the location. Did they not work it out? Or is it landmarks and the sun?
When they're navigating to something, they will give directions using the sun, and that will change during the day because they've got a real special bit of brain that calculates the angles and makes the distance right where in comparison to where the sun is. But for general, once they know a route, they'll go by landmarks, and they'll know where they live by landmarks. They don't know where they live by the sun because the sun moves all day. And you can really confuse them if you turn your hive 180 degrees. And it's not moved 3 foot, but the entrance is at a completely different place. So that might have something to do with they're used to light coming in at a certain angle or something. But we're talking 3 foot or 3 miles. And in winter, you can move shorter distances. And there's reasons for this. Ted Hooper reckons the best time to move is after a week of frost in winter to do this short distance thing. Because there's no forage at winter time, then they're not flying out looking for anything. So there's a lot of bees who might not have been very far. So they're not going to go out and reorientate and because they're fixed on where they are. And they're not doing these long journeys for forage, so they're more happy with just staying there. So if you move them and you put something across the entrance, they can, because not many have been on long journeys, they're quite happy to go, oh, well, something's changed. I'll do that reorientation flight. I'm not going very far because it's too cold. And that winter's probably the easiest time because there's less supers on. There's less flying bees. The hive's easier to lift. And as long as you're not in 6 foot of snow, there's a lot better than sort of trekking around dry fields with heavy supers. If you can strap your hive up with 2 parallel ratchet straps and then strap your hive to a ladder, then 2 people can easily move a hive a fairly decent distance without a lot of effort. But we moved hives on our apiary from one end of the apiary to the other, and it's only 100 meters, but we did that in winter because there were very few flying bees out. Yes, Francine.
The other thing I was told to do, and it seems to work, whether it's necessary or not, is once you've moved your bees a few feet because it's winter, put a sheet of glass in front of the entrance, not clear glass, but something frosted or something with lines in, or so that when they come out, they have to avoid this obstacle. They go round it.
And they pay attention.
That's right.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons people say put a branch or something, not necessarily blocking the entrance up, but something when they come out, they realise something's different. And if you tried that in summer with a sort of 100-meter move, most of the bees would go back to where they came from, because they're all foraging every day, and they navigate by that big tree over there, and they just automatically come back to the hive. But in winter, they're not doing the foraging. The moving a hive on your own, I think, is actually quite tricky to do, because you've got to be able to not drop it and put it down without doing your backing. So I'd always suggest you get someone to help you, and the strapping a ladder across a hive means you can carry it at a sensible height as well.
What about putting it in a wheelbarrow?
You can, but I have experience of moving supers in a wheelbarrow when they are empty and heavy, and they do tend to bounce about a bit. So I would prefer not to be moving them in a wheelbarrow, just because they do tend to get joggled about a lot. There is a point in the winter about the temperature, and if you move them when it's very, very cold, then they will be in a very good cluster. And if you joggle them about in a wheelbarrow, or you drop them or bump them, you could quite easily split the cluster. And because it's so cold, they can't recluster, and you're going to lose a lot of bees.
There are some devices that you can buy for moving them, which are based on a pretty similar design to a wheelbarrow. They just cost a lot more, and they have a bracket on.
I'd give it a go, and let us know how you get on next year, Graham. Sounds like a perfect idea.
There is a really nice clamp system that the bee inspector sent me a photo of, but I haven't included in this talk because I haven't asked him if I could. And it's sort of it's copied off a shop design, but basically it works by lifting up either end, and it holds the hive in tight. But I think most people have got a short step ladder of some sort, and if you've got a single length of ladder, then you can use that really easily to actually strap to the top of a hive. But you need to strap your hive shut, and if you've got heavy hive stands, you need the straps not to include that. So you actually need a third person to carry the hive stand for you.
I think there is a thing called a hive barrow.
There is something with a flat base, but unless you're on perfectly flat ground, wheelbarrow type things really joggle stuff about. I've used a wheelbarrow a lot on to get things to the allotment, and I've got a lot of experience of that road down to the allotment looks really smooth. It's not. So you've only got to go over a fairly small rock and it all jumps up. So you've got to think about, if it's 10 degrees and you've sealed the bees in, then they're not in such a tight cluster that they can't all crawl back together and get in the cluster. So you could joggle them about quite a bit then, and it really wouldn't matter as much as if it was 5 degrees and they're not going to be able to crawl back to each other. So the temperature thing's quite important.
Dan, can I ask, I don't know if I'm being a bit thick, but see the parallel ratchet straps, what's that about? Why are you not crossing them?
You don't cross them because they can slip. The boxes will slip, whereas if they're two that way, then there's less slippage. And if you were being really careful and had a lot of ratchet straps, you strap them to both ways, and then you know it's definitely not going anywhere. You can buy these staples that go through into your hive boxes, so you can seal your hive up first and then nail them in, and then you nail them in at all the corners and your boxes aren't going to slip then. But I think the same thing applies. If it's less than sort of, I don't know, about 8 degrees, you risk, when you're hammering these staples in, damaging the cluster. And for a short journey, two ratchet straps is probably fine.
Because I crossed mine over, I never thought about that. Like the one on top.
If you're not moving your hive, it doesn't matter. But
no, I moved them across the garden.
Right.
But we did it like a foot at a time. It was autumn. We didn't do it all in a one.
So you weren't dragging them 100 meters all in one go. No.
Thanks.
But yeah, this 10 degrees is really important, which means you do have to shut them in. And the best thing to use for that is a piece of foam or some cardboard and duct tape. I wouldn't ever put duct tape over the entrance, but just because I have visions of you pulling the duct tape off the entrance and there being loads of bees stuck to it. So I'd put a bit of foam in, duct tape it on, because I'm a firm believer in belt and braces. And if you're ever putting them in the car with you, you will want to make sure you are belt and braces. That. Yes, Mark?
We've moved a couple of hives and we do use duct tape, but we stick duct tape sticky side to sticky side, so it doesn't stick the bees.
Yeah.
Stick the tape on and then pin the tape as well, belt and braces. But I'm going back to your other point. I'm liking the idea of the ladder, just 2 sturdy poles.
Yeah.
Just a stretcher, isn't it? I'm thinking, what am I going to do? We've got to move the hive, and it's a woodland, and the wheelbarrow, you're right, is joggly. 2 poles under the straps. Perfect. I shall remember that. Anyway.
This is one of these hive movers. There's various different ones. The bee inspectors was a bit similar to that. And it looks like it shouldn't work, but it's like magic. When you lift those up, they grip the hive, and so you can move that. I had a lot more confidence in the ladder, though, I will say. And also we had a lot.
Agree with you. It's just that if you don't have a second person, that's the only thing I was thinking about. If you have to do it on your own.
Yeah, if you have to do it on your own, then you will use whatever options available.
Yeah.
They're really heavy though. Honestly, they're so heavy to lift. Even a poly hive with bees in is really heavy.
My concern
about if you could put your arms around it and walk and bend down and gently put it down, you know, it's really quite a lot.
Walk your site as well. Make sure you know your route. Get rid of any stones or anything that's in the way.
Yeah. Yes, you need to make sure you've got a clear run. I'm just trying to think about the only way to do it if you are literally on your own.
There is another way if you're on your own. I mean, they always say it's advisable to take somebody with you anyway, in case it falls and it splits apart. But you can buy yourself a 4-wheeled garden trolley, which you can lift it in and trundle along.
That's what I use with mine. They're brilliant.
I have a 4-wheel trolley, and again, it jiggles about a bit on our allotment. The wheels on it are quite solid though. This is another one that's metal. Again, you need 2 people for that. We have kept 2 old wheelbarrow frames on our allotment rather than putting them in the skip, because we're planning to make super carriers. So we're going to put a floor on it that's designed for holding supers on, and then you can just run a ratchet strap round and it'll hold them on a bit better. It'll have the same problem as a wheelbarrow, but there'll be 2 of them. So we'll be able to use 2 loads, and you just need a crown board either side of it to make sure the bees can't get back in. But I think moving supers is something you need to think about, and that comes on to another talk I've been preparing. But when you pick your apiary site, is pick a really good one to start with, because that would avoid you having to move your hives a short distance. And secondly, have a look at the ground. So when you know you're going to be taking heavy supers off, you're not going to have to climb over a fence. You're not going to have to duck round something someone's built. You're not going to have to wade through a pond. You want easy access, not just for taking the hive there, but for bringing those supers back. Because to be honest, a stack of supers weighs a lot more than a hive does in winter. And you'll probably be doing all the grunt work yourself. Summer moves are when it gets really interesting, because you might have supers on, or you might have partly filled supers on, in which case you've got quite a big stack. But in summer, you have bigger colonies, and there's more risk of them overheating. So you need to invest in travel screens, and that's either making them yourself, and you can buy the leftover bits of Varroa floor mesh from places like Thorns, and make your own travel screens. And all it is it replaces your crown boarding roof with a screen that's mostly mesh, so there's lots of air can get in. You can spray or pour water through the screen, and that means on a long journey where we're talking, you know, more than an hour, you can stop every hour and make sure your bees have some water, because if they don't have water, they can overheat, and then you end up with a big load of dead bees. And if they're in a car, the temperature in the car can get very warm as well. And you've always seen the things where people get upset because dogs have died because they've been left in a car with the windows up. Well, bees will also die if they're left in a car with the window up. So you need to plan your journey really well. Be really well prepared. Make sure you've got air in all your tyres, you've got petrol, you've got your car in good working order, that you do have a subscription to whichever recovery service you actually use, because you don't want to have to ask your brother-in-law to come and rescue you with 3 hives in the car, because the chances are he's going to run screaming. Know where you're going, and that sounds really, really stupid, but if you're moving your hives at dusk or actually in the dark by the time you get there, you need to be able to recognize the place in the darkness, and that might actually mean making sure you've got torches, that you know what the gate looks like. You know, maybe check on what 3 words and check that on their system that you're at the right place if it doesn't look right. Make sure you know how to get through any gates, and don't forget your bee suit, because when you're moving bees, you might actually want to keep that in the car with you. Most people suggest wearing your bee suit in the car and not having the hood up until you need it. And if you ever get stopped by the police while you're moving bees, then, you know, have something that says you're a beekeeper. Explain to them as quickly as you can you're a beekeeper. Make sure you've got a safe load as well. If you've just piled stuff onto your roof or something and it looks unsafe, then you'll get stopped for that. And you don't want to delay this journey unnecessarily, because every second counts when it's really hot for the bees. So make sure you prepare the new site the night before, that you know how to get onto it through any gates that are there. Double check with the landowner if it's not your land. Prepare your stands there in advance, or have a second person driving up with you and get them to do the stands in advance, because they'll be able to drive a bit faster over the bumps and things than you will with the bees. Take head torches at night, because you'll be carrying things and you won't actually be able to hold a normal torch. Lots of people use the phone on their the torch on their phone these days, and whilst that's really effective, you actually need to be able to hold it. So it's a nice idea, but you need head torches, I think. And you could even strap torches with a bit of duct tape to your hive, just to give you an extra bit of light. And register your new site with BeeBase, because if you register a new site, then you'll get any disease alerts. So if you wanted to take your bees to the heather, then you might find that you get a disease alert the week before you were planning to go, and if you had took them because you weren't registered, you risk moving disease out of an area when you brought your hives home. So the preparation starts the day before, and you make sure your frames are all well packed together. So if you've accidentally left a frame out, the day before is the time to put it back in. And the frames that are wide all the way to the bottom in the brood box don't rattle about anywhere near as much as the normal Hoffman ones or the DN ones. But you want a full box of frames. Get a dummy board in if you've not got one, because you want to reduce the amount of movement that can happen. And put your ventilated screen on in place of the crown board, and don't lose your crown board. Probably put it on top of the screen for now, and put your roof back on, but get your ratchet straps round the hive, so they're going under the floor and over the screen, but nothing else. You don't want to strap your roof to it, and get them strapped on so that in the morning you're just picking it up. Get your entrance prepared for closing, and as soon as it's dark and they've stopped flying, close the hive up. And foam or duct tape is really good. And once you've done that, you can add the staples if you're using them. But don't bang staples in before you close the hive up. And if you do, tell us how many stings you get. But this is some quite simple preparation things. So you do need to be a little bit prepared. If it's a long journey, every hour or so check your hives are still all right, that they need a bit more water pouring in, and make sure they're not moving around. If you've got a truck or a trailer or something, then fix them all up to one end so they're all next to each other. And you can do that when they've not got roofs on. So you take the roofs off when you're transporting. So it might be you need to put them in the car with you, or in your friend's car with the hive stands, but make sure you're taking everything up you need, because you don't want to travel for 2 hours and then go, oh, do you know where the hive roofs are? Oh, they're 2 hours away. That's no good at all. And if you've got ratchet straps and fixing points in your car, then strap everything so it can't move, because you don't want to accidentally brake suddenly and discover your hives are sliding around, because you will put the fear of God into yourself, and the thought of lots of bees running around the inside of your car will scare you silly. Yes, David?
Do you load your bees with your frames sidewards or longways?
I was going to ask that as well.
I've read parallel to the direction of travel, and I've discussed this with my husband, and he says it probably doesn't make any difference. It depends how you drive. You want to make it such a smooth journey that you're not going to go fast around corners. You're not going to do that sudden braking. So you need to be really aware of how badly you normally drive, and drive like your grandmother's sat on the roof or something, you know, because...
Just one other question, sorry. Instead of pouring water through the hive travel screen, are you better spraying?
I've read both. I've always sprayed bees when we've gone anywhere with a nuke rather than pouring water through, because it's a question of how much you pour through.
Yeah.
And it would depend how hot it was. If it was really, really hot, then, you know, splashing water through is not going to do them any harm at all. And, you know, there's no guidelines on this. It's if they're very agitated, spray them, because it'll shut them up and give them something to do for the next hour while, you know, they're mopping the water up.
I'll just say one story. The first time I got bees, I had no bee suit. I had just bought a hive and the boy had sold me bees, and I had to drive 30 minutes away. And I met him at the car park and he gave me the bees, and he says to me, "Now drive carefully." And I was going on the motorway. On the first corner, I heard the bee box sliding over to the back corner. And all I could think of was, here I am driving up the motorway, bees everywhere. And I took it really slow to get home. I was never glad to get out of the car and see no bees.
Well, one of the hints I can give you is if you've got bees if you've got an estate car, you can fill your back of your car with bees. And if any get out, you open the windows, because as you're going along, that draft keeps them in theory to the back of the car. What it doesn't account for is when they're on the roof, they can crawl all the way round and then drop off on you. And then you're there going, my arm's a bit itchy. Oh, there's a bee on it. And that's a bit interesting. I wasn't driving the car when I had a bee drop on me, so it wasn't a concern. But I imagine if it dropped on Nick, it would have been a different matter.
Ryan,
on
yes,
the
Paul?
issue of, sorry.
I carry the bees around in the car quite often, and I always run the frames parallel. But before I actually slide them in the car and strap them down, I do actually spray them with a very fine mix of water with the travelling frame on top. And then I make sure that all the windows in the car are open, no matter whether it's winter or summer, and the sunroof open. Put the signs in the window, and it's hilarious to watch people as they try to overtake you and then see the signs and see you in your suit and think, eh.
On the subject of the frames, parallel, I would suggest if they were facing the same direction as you're driving, you can control.
Mean parallel? So
yes, parallel to your route, not perpendicular, but parallel.
Yeah.
You can control the speed that you go around corners, but you cannot always control any unexpected braking.
That's why you stick them in parallel, so that when you're braking, they don't move.
Yes.
It's up to you how you go around the corner. If you want to be Sterling Moss and go around at 60 miles an hour, crack on with it.
Well, you're asking for trouble then, aren't you?
Yes, because it should be Lewis Hamilton going round the corners fast, not Sterling Moss. But yes, one of the other things about in your car, even our estate car has strap things built in to put ratchet straps through. So have a really good look at your car the day before you come to load it up, and you might find there's loads of points to harness your hive to. That's if you have to take them in the car. If you've got a trailer, then it's a bit less scary, because then they're not in the car with you. You can fill the boot with all your roofs and floor, your stands and things. But I think the amount of care you take loading them on is really important, and making sure they're not going to move during the journey, because if you're driving, the last thing you want is loads of bees to jump out at you, and you to have to try and drive through stung eyes. Yes, Kirk.
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Right. Have I not lowered your hand either, David? You can come
I just
back
noticed
in.
someone's hand was lower and I was investigating, and then
Oh, right. Okay. Right. So
when I moved my hives up 100 miles up the motorway to Cumbria, I got a friend to drive the hives in his van.
Yeah.
So that's a good idea.
It is, if you can find someone with a trailer or something. If you've got someone with one of those Hilux flatbed truck things where you've got a cab in it as well for passengers, then you put all your junk in the cab bit, hives in the back, you're sat far away from them, you don't need to worry. But you have to think about, if they do split open on the journey, you're losing bees, and you don't want that. So make sure you prepared the hives really well. At the journey's end, this is the really important bit, to make sure you've got your bee suit with you and get your hives set up and released as soon as possible. Because they've obviously been trapped in a long time, and we want to get them out, especially if you're moving them late at night. They're not going to go foraging, but you want to get some more air in, and to let them all come to the entrance if that's what they want to do. So you put the crown board on top of the screen, because these bees are going to be a bit cheesed off after a long drive. So don't take the screen off today, and put the roof on, and then as long as they're open, leave them. And some people write very comically about how the bees were angry enough to chase them down the hill in the dark. Just take care in the dark. If you're running away from bees, falling over is going to hurt you more than a bee sting. And when you come back to the hives at your next visit, that's when you can take the screen off, because they'll be really relaxed and calm and happy. But if you try and do that in the middle of the night, you're really asking for trouble. So if you've got one of these, they're lovely. If you've got a trailer of some description, then that's quite good. But make sure you know how to drive with it on. Some people may not have the right thing on their license to drive trailers. I don't know whether there's a limit on the size of the trailer, but I know that the license requirement changed. The biggest concern should be how heavy the hives are, because if you're trying to do it on your own and you hurt your back, your career as a beekeeper ends fairly soon, because it's quite an arduous thing lifting supers every day you do an inspection. So take plenty of care. And one of the danger points is when you're very close to the ground, because you're not paying quite enough attention to how you're handling the hives. They can get very warm, so make sure you stop at least every hour and add some more water. And whether you just spray through or pour some water in, try both. I don't think you can overwater them with an open mesh floor. You'll just have a wet floor underneath. If they do escape en route, then you've got a bigger problem. If there's one or two, it's very minor. But if there's a lot, you're losing a percentage of your colony that could have an effect. So you've got to take all the precautions you can to make sure that doesn't happen. Because otherwise, those bees that escape, you can't go and round them up. They won't know where they live. They're unlikely to find anywhere else to live. They're going to die angry, cold and lonely. And they might even sting someone. And we always want to avoid people getting stung by bees, because that gives bees a really bad reputation. And never use a mesh over the entrance, because they'll all want to come out that way, and they can get quite distressed when they can't, especially during a moving vehicle journey. So always block it up with something solid, and then they just don't try to get out that way. Have assistance, because that goes straight back to the first point. Hives can be very heavy, and it's a really good thing to do. If you're moving hives to the heather, then find another beekeeper who wants to move a couple of hives too, and then do it as a joint venture, because that way you're sharing the lifting, you're sharing the work, and you're sharing the experience, and that can make your beekeeping much more fun, I think. And don't forget your PPE. Your veil will stop you getting loads of stings on your face. So make sure you've got one in the car. If you've just got a simple hood to keep in the front of the car with you, if they're in the vehicle with you, I think a bee suit's a bit warm to be sat in a car with over proper clothes. But some people don't mind just wearing it as a boiler suit. But a simple hood's just in case there's a few too many bees loose in the car, just to stop them from interfering with your driving. And short trips away. Why might your bees have a short holiday away? Does anyone want to throw in a suggestion?
Oilseed rape.
Oilseed rape, that's a good one. Anyone else?
Himalayan balsam.
You might want to take them to the balsam. It'd be quite a worthwhile crop, I think. And any other?
The heather.
Yes, excellent answer there.
Just to lift them if you needed to change their position, I suppose.
Yep, if you need to move them in your garden in the middle of summer, the easiest way is to move them away and bring them back. But you might need to leave that 3 weeks. What might be another reason you might need them moved away from your house?
Swarm.
No.
So
wasp attack.
Neighbours.
Well, neighbours, you probably wouldn't be bringing them back.
Building work.
Building work, that's the one I was actually looking for there. If you've got some building work to be done near your house and you've got bees, then the chances are your builders will cry and go, oh, we can't do the work because of the bees. So if you have to move them away for a week or two while builders do work, then if you've got several hives, make sure you know which hive came from which place, so that when they come home, they're put in the right spot again. Just a real simple little thing there. But quite often, a short trip away is to actually get a crop. And there's a really good video about the guy who took his hives to the heather, and he makes up a complete new super or two each for them, and then he gets them to the heather just before it's going to open, and he gives them sort of 5 gallons of syrup to draw these 2 supers with, and they get all the comb drawn just as the heather's opening, and then he gets a crop in this beautiful drawn new comb, and then he can take it home and do it all as cut comb. But heather's something that's a bit of a specialised crop like oilseed rape. But you might also take them away for a bit of pollination services. If you've got a friend with an orchard, they might say, well, would you bring your bees in spring? And you can say, yeah, and you can take them. They're quite like apple. I think it's apple they like to the exclusion of almost everything else, apart from dandelions. And the problem being, that means people with orchards generally have to mow in between the trees to make sure there's no distraction, because if there was loads of wild flowers underneath, the bees might spend all their time looking at them rather than the apple or the cherry or the plum or whatever.
Diane?
Yep.
2 other times that you might consider is, one is if you know you're going into hospital, or quite often like around here, if you know your apron is going to be flooded, then you're going to have to move them.
Yeah, flooding is quite a big one, especially at the moment, I suspect, for some people. Your short distances, less than 3 foot at a time, and don't rush it. Leave a day in between each move if you can. Think about it as a very relaxed journey across the garden for them rather than a sprint. Because if your neighbours can see these swirling bees, then they're going to be scared, and we don't want people scared of honeybees, because they only sting if you get properly in the way.
So are you talking about 3 foot per day?
Yes, not more than 3 foot a day.
Okay, but you don't need to leave them in that position for more than a day.
I think you should probably leave them in that position for at least a day. So move them.
But 2 days, you could.
Move them every other day.
Okay.
But what I did suggest to someone who had quite a long garden is she'd be better off actually installing a miniature railway and getting them on a little carriage and just chugging it along a little bit each day. I thought that would be quite lovely. And while she liked the idea, the cost of having a railway installed was more expensive than she liked the sound.
It'd be easier to put wheels on the hive, wouldn't it?
It would, but again, it comes to the ground. It's got to be fairly even and level.
What about leaves on the line?
Yeah, that would be a huge problem, wouldn't it? Yes, Kirk.
Or you could make a canvas with the scenery on rollers and just keep rolling the scenery past each day until you get to the new position and then just move them there.
Right, go on, Kirk.
Once you've moved them more than 3 miles to move them back, how long would you leave them in the new place for? Like more than a few days?
The guideline is supposed to be 3 weeks because then all the foragers who knew their old place will have died. And then when you bring them back, it's a new set of foragers who only knew the new place. So they quite happy not to go and get lost. Go on, Lorraine. Lorraine was next, I think.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say back on the railway theme, but actually maybe practical, is I've got one of these kind of flat beds, not a wheelbarrow, but kind of is, and you can like tip it up for moving house and all that, but the flatbed part. And I did mine 3 foot at a time, and just like you say, it was actually a bit much. By the 3rd day, there was the swirling bees, and I thought it'd gone well. You know, day 1 had gone well, it might have been day 2. So we just slowed it down, but I did think, because it was autumn, the weather wasn't wild or anything, I should have done it on that flatbed thing and just put bricks around the wheels. Yeah, because it is heavy. It's heavy work, especially when you're lifting the frames as well, because I don't have spare stands. So, you know, we had to like inch them across and then lift the stand again. It was hassle.
Go on, was Paul? Oh, David's got his hand up first, actually.
Right.
Go to David.
No, I was just going to say that the chairman of our bee club, he had actually moved his bees to Heather, but it turned out it was 2.7 mile away, as it was over 3 Mile Bay Road.
Yeah.
And that night he was milking the cows, and he came home out, and the bees were all sitting where the stand was. So the next time he moved them over 4 mile away, and he brought them back 4 weeks later.
Yeah.
And he put them into a new stand, new place. Whenever he came out later on, there was a pile of bees where the old stand was. So there's some of the old foragers that were obviously 5-6 weeks old that came back to the old stand, even though they've been away over 4 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. It said 3 weeks, but bees may live longer than that once they're foraging. If they've not done a particularly hard day's work every day, their wings will stay intact and they might live a bit longer. Yes, Steve?
I picked up the nuke about August last year from the lady in my bee club, put a strap around it, carried it from her back garden to the back of my state car, got out onto the road, didn't realise there was about 15 bees underneath hanging on the mesh floor. So that's another thing to look out for if you're going to move bees, because sometimes they don't all go through the entrance, they just cling on the mesh floor underneath.
Yeah. Yeah, that was meant to be in there. I had thought
that was
about
pretty
that.
scary, I must admit. If I'd have put it in the car and drove home, I'd have had about 15 bees flying around inside the car.
When I collect a swarm, I have 2 duvet cover sheet things with me, because one's for wrapping the box up and the second one for as if there's bees just all over that because of the fact they've been sat on the grass or whatever underneath and they've got everywhere. Because I'd really rather not have bees in the car. But because that's only ever been short journeys, I don't see a problem with wrapping them up in a double layer of fabric. If I was going to do a long journey, I'd certainly have to rethink that because they wouldn't have any ventilation. So, yes, Jonathan. Unmute. Space.
Yeah, sorry I joined you late. I've moved around quite a lot, maybe less than half a mile. But when I moved them, I put grass in front of the entrance, and it seems to always work. And I put a nuke in the original location, and if any bees went back, I took them the next day. And
yeah, but you are sort of making work for yourself, aren't you? I know the soft grass thing. It's supposed to be something the bees can remove, and by the time they've removed it, all the bees that want to go out go, something's odd here, we're going to have another look. And it is supposed to be quite effective, but I wouldn't recommend it as a, you know, an always going to work. So,
but I've done it maybe 10 times without any problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Diane.
Francine. Oh, sorry, Paul's been waiting a while, hasn't he? So you're not on my screen, Paul.
That's okay. I get used to it. If you're any good at woodwork, do what I call a trolley dolly, basically a frame with some industrial casters on. You can put them on there, on your hive or whatever on there, and just move them as you go down the garden. There's no need for railway tracks, but it's ideal as well that you can just turn around and put the hive on or your supers on if you're working on a hive.
I think you must have a very flat, even path or lawn. I've been in far too many gardens with uneven paths and uncut lawn. Yeah, well, there you go. If you've got smooth, flat paths, you can use wheels really easily. So who else had their hand up? Was it Francine?
Yes, I've just remembered another occasion when you may be moving bees is if you're running an observation hive or an observation nuke like I used to do, and you take them to a fair or, you know, for the day, you take them to show the public. Because it also reminded me of the 15 bees that travel under the mesh floor, because by the time you discover them, they're flying around the public. You've got to think about that one.
Yes. Good night to whoever's just said they've got to go. I can't read the name. It's all David. Good night, David. And Lenka's gone. Yeah, there's lots of thoughts on the grass one. And if I was going to move bees more than 3 foot during the summer, which I wouldn't, I'd move them much further and move them back. I'd be probably very tempted to try the grass thing, but because one of my hives, well, 2 of them are in the garden, if I wanted to move both of those and then lots of bees came home, I think that would disturb my neighbours a bit. It probably disturb my husband to see lots of bees swirling around, and then the idea of having to take a nuke box and go and empty it at the other hive position as well. Sorry, I have got a call. I will have to message that. Yeah, so it's one of these things, isn't it? There's lots of little things you can do, but if you have bees return to where they were, you have to think about what's going to happen to them. And if you've got bees that fly back to somewhere where there's going to be people about, then that can be, you know, you don't want people getting stung by these odd few returning bees. It's like when you take a swarm, if you don't wait until dusk till all the scout bees have come home, then that's a risk of leaving flying bees about, and flying bees will fly about until they land on something or someone, and if they sting someone, it gives bees a really bad reputation. So I'd always personally try to avoid having returning bees at all. It's sort of best practice.
Dan, is there any risk? I remember when I got my first nucleus back, the terror of opening that plug to let them out. Because I just thought they would just go out and bolt and be like, oh, trees. And then they wouldn't know where they lived. But they did somehow come back. Did they always come back? Do you lose a percentage when you go to a new spot, do you think? Noticeable about, anyway.
If you've moved them from more than 3 miles away, they will come out and it will all look different, and they should all reorientate. And you can do things like putting a bit of grass or a bit of cardboard over the thing for a couple of hours. If you put grass, the advantage is you don't have to go back and take it out because it will wilt and the bees can push it out. But if you put something more solid there, you'd have to remember to remove it. But just normally having been shut in, and then they come out, and instantly the front view as they come out looks different, is normally enough to sort of make them go, oh. And as long as they're not going to fly around a bit and see anything they recognise, they're not going to go anywhere else. They're going to go back to where they've just come out of, which will be your nuke.
They'll still go home.
But it's sort of like homing pigeons. If you were going to sell bees to people in a very cheeky way, you could sell really big bursting nukes to them, and you could show them at your house there were big bursting nukes, and then take them a mile away to their house. You could, let them off they go, and then the next day you've got half a nuke full of bees again, because all your bees know where they live, and they might not realise for a week that they haven't got as many bees. And that would be a very cheeky, wrong thing to do. But it does pay to ask where the person you're buying bees from is coming from with your bees, because if they live really close, that could happen. And it might happen because they're not aware of how close they are to you. Especially if you're going to pick the bees up, you've got to think, no, these are too close. This is going to be a right nuisance.
But that doesn't happen with a swarm, does it?
No, swarms are dead easy. Because they'll just be happy to be back in a box somewhere out of the light. So, are there any more questions? Jan's saying, I was moving a nuke every night, a foot at a time. After a few drinks, see, I like this story already. After a few drinks, what happened? I'd forgotten. I went out, no suit, picked the nuke up, put it down to move the stand. They weren't happy. They started to buzz. I very quickly put them back and legged it back inside. Yes. Don't drink and move bees. I think that's the crucial thing there. And the problem in summer, if you're waiting till all the bees have gone in, it's about 10 o'clock in the worst bit of summer. And that's just like, oh my God, you sat watching them, because by the time you actually get home, after you've moved them, it's going to be very, very late, and it'll be too late to have a drink at midnight. Some of us think it's too late to have a drink at midnight anyway. I'm sure there are people who do drink at that time.
That's like saying during lockdown you can't move bees, because we're all drinking so much.
I nearly did dry January, apart from 2 little tiny drinks. And I've not had a drink in February yet. Is anyone else doing dry February?
I'm doing dry February.
No. Yeah, so am I.
Just by accident, really. Like, I've just not really got a life, and I'm working too much.
Mine's mostly by very accident, because I read somewhere, don't drink when you've hurt your ankle. And I suppose the idea is if you fall over again, you're going to really, really hurt it, aren't you? So I stayed off the booze till about the 27th, I think it was.
I don't like it when an organisation tells everybody to not drink or use somebody's product for a whole month, and they have no idea how it might affect that industry.
Which organisation?
Really, well, whoever it is that comes up with these
State-free September.
Dry, yeah. I mean, it's like
November.
They had one in October, November. Now it's January. And who are
Campaign for Real Ale have got a tri-annuary, so try as many different ales.
Well, I just did. I just did. I can't remember November.
I am going to stop recording now, just because.